Picture a predator who, doesn't roar. They weep. Someone who systematically dismantles your sanity while convincing the whole world and, well, you that they are the absolute victim.
Oh, it is truly terrifying to experience.
It is. You look for teeth and claws, but all you find are heavy sighs, withdrawn affection, and this fragile posture that demands you continuously pour your energy into a bottomless void. Welcome to the debate.
Thank you. Today, we are decoding the hidden, highly destructive world of covert narcissism.
Right. We're looking at a deeply complex pathology and asking, is this best understood as a calculated predatory strategy of manipulation and power extraction, or is it fundamentally a devastating engine of psychological trauma?
A trauma that I would argue is driven by internal shame, which completely warps the reality of everyone in its blast radius.
Exactly. Now, I approach this from the perspective of behavioral profiling. I see covert narcissism as a dark, predatory adaptation. It is a highly calculating strategy. They use it to mask grandiose entitlement under this camouflage of, introversion, altruism, and vulnerability. The core drive is power, just like a grandiose narcissist, but the methodology operates entirely in the shadows.
Yeah, and I approach this from the trenches of trauma-informed therapy. While I absolutely recognize the manipulation, focusing solely on this idea of a predatory calculation, well, it misses the profound psychological reality of what is actually happening to the victim.
How so?
Well, covert narcissism is incredibly destructive precisely because the narcissist's pain and deep-seated shame are actually very real to them. It's not totally faked. This creates a mind-bending push-pull dynamic for the partner. We have to look at the insidious, invisible red flags, because to the victim, the total destruction of their reality is the most salient feature here.
Okay, but let's lay out the actual mechanics of this. From a profiling standpoint, the covert narcissist is not a fragile, misunderstood soul who just needs enough love to heal.
Right. No one is saying they just need love.
But that's how they present. They are highly calculating individuals who leverage a facade of vulnerability to extract what we call narcissistic supply, attention, validation, control. The psychological literature points directly to the concept of the tendency for interpersonal victimhood, or TIV.
Which is a fascinating framework, I admit. But how are you defining that in action?
Essentially, TIV means they build their entire identity around being the aggrieved party. It operates alongside what is clinically known as self-sacrificing self-enhancement.
Okay, let's break that down for the listeners.
Right, let's translate that out of the jargon. Think of the coworker who loudly sighs while staying late to organize the supply closet, making sure everyone knows they're the only one who cares.
Yes, the martyr.
Exactly. They perform altruism. They play the martyr. Their apparent suffering isn't genuine fragility. It is a covert strategy to dominate others, to create deep, unpayable obligations, and most importantly, to completely avoid accountability by maintaining plausible deniability.
Right, but
They want the exact same special treatment as the loud, grandiose narcissist who demands the best table at a restaurant. They've just realized that playing the victim is a much safer, more insidious way to acquire that power.
But viewing this purely as a calculated Machiavellian master plan, it fundamentally misunderstands the emotional core of this disorder. And more importantly, it misunderstands why victims stay.
They stay because they are manipulated.
Yes, but because the covert narcissist's deep-seated shame and feelings of defectiveness are real to them, the victim senses genuine pain. That pain isn't completely fabricated out of thin air.
I disagree on the origin of that pain, but go on.
This is what creates a devastating trap. The victim thinks they are dealing with someone who is just depressed, misunderstood, or heavily burdened by the world. This leads to the partner walking on eggshells, right? They are constantly trying to soothe an unsoothable wound.
Wait, look at how they use pity. It is incredibly precise. You say they are in pain, but let's dissect how they weaponize that pain through the martyr complex.
Weaponized, yes, but
By playing the ultimate victim, they achieve a state of moral elitism. If you're listening to this and you constantly feel like you are the bad guy in every single disagreement, no matter what actually happened, this is the mechanism at work.
Oh, absolutely. The partner always feels at fault.
Because they demand special treatment without ever having to earn it. It's a completely offensive strategy disguised as defense. They suck the oxygen out of the room by demanding that you cater to their constant simmering grievances.
I come at it from a different way. Because the sheer frustration and terror victims feel in these relationships stems exactly from this confusion. This is exactly what trips victims up.
How do you mean?
Well, the empathetic partner is drawn in by the vulnerability. They see the downcast gaze, the minimizing body language, the quiet suffering, and they just pour endless support into this person. They excuse the profound self-absorption because they view it through the lens of clinical depression or severe anxiety.
Which is exactly what the narcissist wants them to think.
The partner thinks, if I just love them enough, if I'm just patient enough, this dark cloud will lift. They deplete themselves trying to fix a void that cannot be filled because the narcissist's underlying defectiveness requires constant external regulation. The victim isn't being outsmarted by a chess master. They are being drained by someone who entirely lacks the internal structure to soothe themselves.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you were giving them far too much credit for genuine suffering. That's not depression, that's weaponized guilt. We have to make a very clear distinction here.
Okay.
The literature explicitly defines narcissistic depression, and it is vastly different from ordinary clinical depression.
How so, in your view?
While clinical depression is characterized by melancholy, a generalized anhedonia, a deep sadness that permeates everything, narcissistic depression isn't a generalized sadness. It is intense shame, feelings of inferiority, and a pervasive, painful boredom when they lack attention.
Right. The collapse.
Exactly. When the spotlight moves off them, they collapse into a sullen, withdrawn state. Imagine a dinner party where the covert narcissist isn't the center of attention. They don't just sit quietly, they retreat to the corner, cross their arms, and radiate this heavy, miserable energy until someone is forced to walk over and ask, "What's wrong?"
Yes, I've heard that exact scenario from so many clients.
Because it's an extraction tactic. They use their supposed fragility to hijack the room and ensure the partner never looks at their own needs.
It is weaponized, yes. I don't disagree with the behavioral outcome. But it's not necessarily deployed with conscious predatory malice in the moment. It is a desperate defense mechanism against psychic collapse.
I think the malice is very real.
But if we want to talk about how this operates in the home, let's look at the behavioral punishments, because this is where the destruction of the victim's sanity truly accelerates.
Exactly. Let's look at the punishment, because the covert narcissist rarely yells. They don't throw things. Instead, they use the silent treatment, emotional withholding, and weaponized incompetence. Let's unpack weaponized incompetence, because it is brilliant in its cruelty. It's not just conveniently forgetting to do household chores. It's saying they will load the dishwasher, but looting it so haphazardly and poorly that all the plates chip, forcing the exhausted partner to finally say, "Never mind, I'll just do it myself."
Oh, the utter exhaustion of that.
Right, and that is not a mistake. That is highly calculated. By withholding cooperation, they maintain absolute dominance in the relationship without ever leaving fingerprints. If they yelled, they'd be the bad guy.
Yeah.
By giving you the silent treatment or doing a task terribly, they force you to chase them, effectively putting you in the submissive position while they get to play the injured party when you finally get frustrated.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
All right?
Framing this as a cool, calculated master plan minimizes the chaotic, dysregulated nature of the pathology. This behavior is less of a strategic maneuver and much more of a reactive shame-rage spiral.
A spiral they use to control you.
But when a covert narcissist's fragile ego is threatened, say by a partner simply asking them to help around the house, they completely lack the internal tools to process that perceived criticism. They experience what the literature calls humiliated fury.
Humiliated fury.
Yes. But because they are too inhibited or socially anxious to explode like a grandiose narcissist, That fury cannot go outward in a rage. It gets expressed through passive-aggressive withdrawal. They shut down.
And punish the partner.
Yes, the tragedy here is the toll on the victim, who is forced into a perpetual state of hypervigilance. The partner is constantly scanning the environment, trying to read microexpressions, trying to avoid triggering this invisible landmine. The victim lives in a state of terror, not because the narcissist is a mastermind, but because the narcissist is so profoundly dysregulated that anything can cause a collapse.
But the malice is undeniably there. An overt narcissist stabs you in the front, but a covert narcissist slowly poisons your water supply while claiming they are the ones dying of thirst. You have to acknowledge the inherent malice in how they project their own inadequacies onto their partner.
I acknowledge the harm, definitely.
The pathological narcissism inventory breaks this down perfectly. One of the subscales for vulnerability is devaluing. When they don't get the admiration they feel absolutely entitled to, they don't just feel sad, they show sudden disinterest, contempt, and hostility.
Which is incredibly painful for the partner.
They punish you for failing to read their mind and worship their unseen genius. That isn't just a lack of emotional tools to deal with a trigger. That is a punitive, domineering reflex designed to put the partner back in their place.
I acknowledge the punitive outcome, absolutely. It is punitive. But we have to look at how this covert gaslighting and these micro-insults operate on the victim's psyche. It's that plausible deniability you mentioned earlier, but it's weaponized to completely distort reality.
Right. They use backhanded compliments, they engage in subtle sabotage, and they use moral typecasting. Let me explain that because it's so common.
Please do.
Moral typecasting is when they position themselves as the selfless hero of every single narrative, which simultaneously, by default, casts the partner in the role of the selfish villain. If you confront them about a cruel remark, they don't apologize. They say, "Oh, I was only trying to help you because you're so disorganized," or "You're just too sensitive, I can't say anything around you."
Yes, turning it right back around.
Exactly. They completely invalidate the partner's lived experience while maintaining a spotless public image to the rest of the world.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the resulting cognitive dissonance for the victim? This is where the true psychological damage lies and why I insist on the trauma-informed perspective.
The cognitive dissonance is huge, yes.
The victim is dealing with someone who might be performing acts of apparent selflessness to the outside world, volunteering, helping neighbors, but who is inflicting 1,000 invisible paper cuts at home. The cognitive dissonance shatters the victim's reality. I often compare it to a corrupted operating system.
A corrupted operating system.
Right. No matter what pure, validating emotional data the partner inputs into the relationship, the narcissist operating system corrupts it into a virus of shame and projects it back as blame. Because the abuse is so subtle and the narcissist is so good at playing the victim, the partner actually starts to believe that they are the abuser.
They completely internalize it.
They think, maybe I am too demanding. Maybe I am ungrateful. Look at how sad they are. This destroys their sanity. We must emphasize the absolute necessity of recognizing these invisible red flags like chronic confusion and unexplainable exhaustion to protect one's mental health.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. While the victim's trauma is paramount, we cannot effectively protect them unless we accurately label the narcissist's behavior for exactly what it is, a fundamental lack of affective empathy. This is the smoking gun of the pathology.
The empathy deficit is key, yes.
They exhibit what researchers call splintered empathy. We need to unpack this. Splintered empathy means they have the cognitive ability to know what empathy looks like, and they will fake intense compassion for strangers in the news or distant tragedies to secure their image as a highly moral, sensitive person.
Oh, I've seen that so many times.
They will post lengthy, tearful essays online about global events. But to their inner circle, their spouse, their children, they display chilling emotional coldness. When their partner's sitting right in front of them crying over a real issue in their relationship, the covert narcissist is annoyed. They roll their eyes. They walk out of the room.
It's devastating.
That isn't a shame spiral. That is a predatory deficit in human connection. They are conserving their emotional performance for audiences that give them a higher return on investment.
It is a profound deficit, but it stems from the fact that they view the partner's emotions as a threat. Think about the mechanics of it. The partner's tears, the partner's needs, are a demand that the narcissist can't not meet. It triggers their core feeling of defectiveness.
Because they know they can't genuinely connect.
Right. They realize, I cannot fix this, therefore I am bad. So to avoid that feeling, they shut down and project contempt. I've seen this in practice countless times. The partner is sobbing, begging for basic emotional connection, and the covert narcissist looks at them with absolute blank contempt. It is terrifying.
Which is why they need to be exposed.
And this brings us to the critical juncture for anyone listening who relates to this: breaking the cycle. How does a person actually escape this psychological prison?
By exposing the predator. The only way to break the spell is for the victim to clearly recognize the predatory nature of the victim facade. As long as the partner believes they are dealing with a damaged, fragile person who just needs enough love to heal, they will stay trapped forever. The victim must be educated to see the narcissist's behavior as a calculated extraction of narcissistic supply.
But how do they operationalize that understanding? Just knowing it isn't always enough to leave.
By recognizing the underlying psychological machinery. We talk in profiling about schema over compensation. A schema is a deeply held core belief formed in childhood. In this case, it's, I am fundamentally worthless. Overcompensation is the behavioral adaptation they use to fight that belief. They demand that the world treat them as uniquely victimized, uniquely special, to avoid feeling worthless. When you realize that they're pouting, their sudden mysterious illnesses right before your big event, their fatalism are all just mechanical strategies to control you and extract sympathy, well, the spell breaks.
You see behind the curtain.
You stop excusing the abuse because you finally see the machinery underneath. You see the cold calculation.
Exposing the machinery is part of it, but the most empowering step isn't just intellectualizing their behavior as predatory. It requires a profound shift in the victim's own behavior. The victim has to stop trying to fix, heal, or appease the narcissist.
Which goes against their nature.
Exactly. It requires radical acceptance that the narcissist's shame-based pathology will not change, no matter how much love, logic, or patience is applied. The victim has to establish rigid, non-negotiable boundaries.
Which is incredibly difficult for the type of empathetic people who get targeted.
Extremely difficult. If the narcissist goes into a sulking silence, the victim must learn to simply walk away rather than chasing them to ask what's wrong. They must seek external support to dismantle the trauma bond, because the addiction to the cycle of intermittent reinforcement is staggering.
Intermittent reinforcement being the breadcrumbs of affection?
Exactly. It's slot machine psychology. You pull the lever 100 times and get nothing. Just coldness, passive aggression, heavy sighs. But on the 101st time, they give you a moment of pure, vulnerable connection. They say, you're the only one who understands me.
And it hooks them right back in.
That intermittent payoff wires the victim's brain to keep trying, to keep pouring energy in, hoping for another jackpot. Breaking that addiction alone is nearly impossible.
But those rigid boundaries you're talking about only hold if you stop viewing them with pity. If you view them as a wounded animal, your boundaries will crumble the very next time they start weeping about how unfair the world is and how everyone abandons them.
That is the danger, yes.
You have to view them through the lens of behavioral profiling. You have to see that when they claim they are a victim of circumstances, they are actually deploying a highly effective defense mechanism. They are masking their internal emptiness with a demand that you regulate their emotions for them. Once you see the entitlement behind the tears, the pity evaporates. Pity is replaced by clarity.
Clarity, yes, but also self-compassion for the victim. It is incredibly common for highly capable, highly empathetic, emotionally intelligent people to get caught in the web of a covert narcissist. The narcissist's projection is so strong that the victim carries the weight of the relationship entirely on their own shoulders.
Absolutely.
Breaking free means the victim has to redirect all that immense empathy they've been pouring into a corrupted operating system and finally pour it back into themselves. They have to prioritize their own sanity over the narcissist's endless, unquenchable demands.
But we've covered intense ground today. My perspective remains that covert narcissism is fundamentally a dark, predatory adaptation. It is a pathology that weaponizes vulnerability, introversion, and pity to achieve absolute dominance in relationships. By masking their grandiose entitlement under a facade of suffering, they extract narcissistic supply while maintaining plausible deniability. They inflict severe behavioral punishments, like weaponized incompetence and the silent treatment, not simply out of dysregulation, but to maintain control and keep their partner perpetually off balance.
And my stance remains that navigating this pathology requires understanding the profound reality-warping effects of the narcissist's deep-seated shame and defectiveness. The abuse is driven by an inability to process internal inadequacy, which gets projected outward as humiliated fury.
Right.
The resulting cognitive dissonance, trauma bonds, and emotional depletion are devastating. The only way forward for the victim is to radically accept the limits of the narcissist's empathy, prioritize their own mental health, and establish rigid boundaries against the insidious guilt tripping.
Yet, despite our different angles on the core driver of the behavior, we converge on one undeniable truth. Covert narcissism is incredibly destructive precisely because it is so difficult to identify.
Yes, it really is.
It operates entirely under the radar of traditional grandiose narcissism. It doesn't look like the stereotypical arrogant braggart, making it an invisible poison in the home or the workplace.
Absolutely. The damage is profound because the abuse is so deeply hidden behind a mask of suffering. The victim is often fighting a ghost, unable to prove the abuse to outsiders or even to themselves. There is so much more to explore in the clinical literature regarding dark triad traits and trauma recovery, but we hope this discourse provides a lens to see what is hidden in plain sight.
It forces us to confront the chilling complexity of the human mind and the vital importance of looking beneath the surface of supposed vulnerability. Because when you encounter a predator who doesn't roar but weeps, you still have to remember that they are hunting.